Hello and welcome, Unity travelers. In this video, I'm going to be adding some more functionality to the login page that we've been working on for the past 4 or so videos. And this time we're going to make it so when we log in, we actually change scenes. And normally when you have a login page, you want to move the user into your main interface after they log in. So that's kind of what we're going to simulate here. So to start, I'm going to go to this project tab, this folder scenes, and I'm going to right click here and create a new scene. This is the scene that we will be going to after we've logged in. So I'm just going to call this logged in. Also quickly going to change the name of our old scene to make it more clear that this is the login scene. So after we log in, we're now at this empty scene, and I just double clicked it to change scene. And so let's add again some very quick UI just to get an idea what's going on. Nice tip, if you know exactly what UI object you want to add, like let's say I want to add a background, so I might do a panel. If you just create the panel, it'll automatically create the canvas for you. So you don't have to create the canvas first and then create your UI. If you create a UI object, it will automatically create the canvas and put it as a child. So we will call this background. This is our panel. If you are a little lost about, what a panel is, what a canvas is, go back to, I think it was the first video in this series, to learn a little bit more about that. And I'm going to change the alpha value, and we're just going to set it to red so that it's very obvious that we have switched scenes when it loads. I'm going to save the scene, and then I'm going to switch back to login by double clicking it. And you can see now that once we load this logged in scene, it'll be very obvious that we have switched scenes. So now let's implement the functionality portion. I'm going to open up this login manager script. It should launch Visual Studio for you. And then you can see here, this is in our last video. This is where we were checking if the information was correct and then logging in if it was. And so technically we were just debugging or logging that they should log in at that point. So now let's actually implement that. So to start, what we're going to need to change scenes is scene manager dot load scene, and make sure you have this using up here, otherwise that won't work. A nice thing you can do with Visual Studio is if you just type out what you're looking for, and you should be able to, if you hover over it, you can show potential fixes, and it should show up right here. Or you can also right click, go to quick actions and refactoring, and again, that's the same menu. So you can look through this stuff about possible solutions to get this to work, but we just want, usually it's going to be the first one, and we want this using Unity Engine.scene management. So that's helpful if you don't remember these usings. You can find them that way. So we need to call load scene. And then here we need to know which scene we're trying to load. And so if you look at these arrows, you can see this function has a lot of different possible ways to load a specific scene. Generally, I just use the first two, which is either using an index, and the build index, when you add your scenes to the build, which I'll show you how to do later, when you add your scenes to the build, they go in a specific order. So that order is going to be the index. So if the login scene is at the zero position of that list, or that list of scenes, then its build index is 0. Then the next one would be 1, and so on. So you can do it that way, but if you ever change the order, which the order doesn't actually matter, but if you accidentally change the order, then suddenly you're loading the wrong scene. The other thing is if you use the name of the scene. If you decide to change the name of the scene, then again, you're not loading the scene that you want. So either way is fine. It's just be careful what you do so that you don't accidentally mess it up for in the future. I'm just going to assume this is going to be the first scene and that the scene I start with is the login scene, so that will be how the build index works. So now let's look how you set up that build index. And you actually need to do this in order to load any scenes. They have to be set up as part of your build. So what we do is we go back to Unity and we go to File, Build Settings. Let me drag in this window that pops up, and you'll see there are currently no scenes in the build. So we can add the open scene, and this is the first, whatever's in the 0 position is the scene that your application will start in. So whenever someone launches your application, they will first see the login scene. And then now I want to add my second scene, so I go to my scenes folder, I click and drag logged in, and I drag it in here, and you can see now this is it's the second scene, but its build index is 1 because we started 0. And you can also drag and move these scenes around. So whenever you add something, if you want to put it in a specific spot, that's how you do that. But this is perfect for what we're doing. So that's all we need to do. You don't even need to save it. It automatically saves. You just close it. So now, if I go back to the script real quick, we are going to load the scene at build index 1 as soon as they log in. Okay, so let's log in. And if we remember from last time, the only thing we're checking for username and password is if they're empty or not. So we just need to type something in, and we should be able to load our new scene. We have one last step, though. Our submit button needs to call that function, and it already does. We did that in the last video. So actually, that is all we need. But just make sure that after you finish, you always check that your button is going to trigger your function call that will activate that scene change. So, okay. So we should be good to go. Let's hit play. Let's type in user. I'll type in pass, and I'll hit submit. And you can see we've loaded our new scene. So pretty easy. That's how you switch scenes. You're obviously going to want to make your main scene look a lot nicer, and I'll actually be doing that in future videos. This is kind of just the basic logic before I add the updated look. But yeah, so that's kind of how you very basically add functionality to your login page. Let's add a little more functionality by also not just logging an error, but let's actually show the user, hey, there's something you're doing that's not right. And so there's a couple ways we can do this. We can have a red outline around these fields, or we can just have some red text that's just like an error message. I'm going to do that red text error message. It'll be a little easier to show. So again, inside our background, I'm going to right click, go to UI, and add a text mesh pro object. I'm going to move that object right about here. I'm going to center it. You can also center it here. You can see it's at 0. I'm going to move the anchors to the bottom, and let's move this about 100 from the bottom. And the text doesn't actually matter, and it should actually be empty most of the time because this is our error message. So normally we shouldn't have an error. But just for the sake of having something there so we can look at what it's going to look like, let's do something like that. And I think I want this font size to be a lot smaller because we might want a lot of text. So I think I'll actually make this maybe 20, 15. 15 seems good. I'll change the color to red to signify there's an error. Maybe make it bold so it's a little more visible. And let's also add a little more length so we can use up some of this space for our error message. I think I'm going to want it centered. And I also, do I want it center aligned? I think I want it aligned to the top. And I do want wrapping enabled. I do not want overflow. I don't want it to be able to move outside of this box. If for whatever reason the error message is too long, I just want it to truncate at the end for this specific case. And I think that's it. Let's call this our error text. And let's also set this, whoops, not to 0. Let's set it to empty. Okay. So let's go back to our script now and let's get a reference to that text so that we can change its value when something goes wrong. So I'm going to start again with serialized field private. This is also a TextMesh Pro object, but I think this one is just TextMesh Pro UGUI. I know that name is super weird, but generally all of your standard text objects with TextMesh Pro are just going to be a TextMesh Pro UGUI. So it's just something you get used to. And so this is going to be called our error text. Okay, and then, yeah, that's good. And then let's go to the place where we show an error. And instead of just logging this, let's also do error text. Now, a TextMesh Pro object, to access the text that's within it, you just say .text. So in this case, be error text.text. Remember, this is the TextMesh Pro object. This is the text component inside the TextMesh Pro object, or specifically the text that goes into that component. So we can set this text here. We can set it to the same thing we're setting our log to, login check message. Oops. And there we go. So now that should get logged. That error should get logged to that text, and we should see that text appear. So let's try that now. One issue, I forgot to add that reference in Unity. So actually, let me show you what error you get when you do that, because it's quite a common error. And if you get used to understanding the errors, it'll help you understand what you're doing wrong. So you see we have this null reference exception because we do not have a reference to that error text object. Something else to look at here, you can see that it's at CS40, or in the script, in the login manager.cs, it's at 40. And so if we go to here, you can see that line 40 is here. And then also, there's only one object here that requires a reference because it accesses a sub variable within that object. So error text is trying to access text that's inside of it, this text string object. And so that means that error text cannot be null. You cannot access any sub variables within a null object. So that's how we know that error text is the problem. And so if we go back to Unity, we know that we can actually just drag this error text object we created into here. Don't do it during play. That's another thing too. You saw I just did it while the game was running, and it didn't save our changes. So anything you do during play will not save your changes. There are some workarounds to that, but just as a standard practice, try not to do this type of thing during play. So now I'll play again. Our text object should be linked, And there is our error now. So you'll notice though, what we kind of want is we want that error to disappear as soon as we start typing, because maybe we're fixing the error, and so we don't want it to stay even though everything is fine. So let's fix that right now too. So the way to fix that is, remember, our goal is whenever you start typing, remove whatever the error message is. That's our current goal. So if we go to username text input field, and actually we want to do the same thing for password text input field, but if we look at our TextMesh Pro object, you'll see that there is a field for on value changed. So this, again, just like we did with the submit button, we want to call a function here that says just, set that error text to empty. So let's go back to our script and create that function. Let's do it down here. Private string. Well, let's create the let's create this part first. We actually want this to be void, and we will check, or not check. We will remove error text. Okay. When the user types into an input field, we want to remove any error messages, because any error messages, they are likely fixing the error, and we don't want to we don't want them to think the error still exists. Okay, if you wanted to be more advanced, a better way when you do on value change is to actually check not only if they changed if they changed anywhere, but if they actually made a change in the input field that is the problem. But I'm not gonna do that for this video. So all we really need to do is set error text to blank, and that will hide it. And this also cannot be private because it is something we need to show up in the editor. So there we go. It's a very simple function. Here's on value changed. I can actually multi-select password text input field. I held control, and then I clicked on password text input field. And now I can set both of them at the same time. I'm going to click and hold, make sure to click and hold, and drag Login Manager into this field. If you don't click and hold, it's going to switch to Login Manager. So remember to click and hold to drag. Another helpful tip, by the way, if you see this lock button here, if you click that, now when I click on anything else, I won't actually be able to change what's in the inspector. This locks the inspector to that last thing that I was editing, and so this makes it easier to drag something in. Just remember to unlock it later, otherwise you'll be wondering why you can't view something else. Okay, so anyways, I'm going to unlock it. And I'm going to go into this on value changed, go to log manager, and select our function, which is remove error text. Okay, and so now that should be all we need. And as soon as we start typing, we should notice whatever errors we have go away. All right, there it is. And whoops, yep, so there I logged in. And now you have a much more functioning login page with some user feedback on what they need to be doing, to log in correctly. So I hope this video helped. The next video, I will be working on adding some nice images and look to this login page to make it look nicer. And I'll also be teaching you how to grab stuff from the asset store, Unity's asset store, free assets. That's what I'm going to use. But you can also purchase stuff. And I'll show you how to do that in the next video. So thanks for watching.